welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, with you know who, your favorite conservatarian, Jeff Charles. And I've got another fire conversation for you today. We're going to be talking about abortion, Roe v. Wade, and all that good stuff. You know what's been going on in the news, and this is going to be a topic of debate for a while. So I thought it was important for us to have more conversations about this issue, especially from a conservative Christian perspective. So I think you're really going to like my guest. But before we get into everything, you know what you got to do. You got to do it right now. Like this video, share this video. And if you haven't already subscribed, you need to fix that. Once you subscribe to my channel, in the words of President Pedro, all of your wildest dreams will come true. Yeah, that was a Napoleon Dynamite reference for older people, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, go ahead and subscribe. Also, hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new interview, which I do every Wednesday and Friday evening at 7 o'clock Eastern. If you want to support my work monetarily, the links are in the show notes below. We've got the PayPal app, the CashApp, and Venmo app, and all the other apps. Every little bit counts. I appreciate all of it. It helps me to bring you this content here. Now, without further ado, I'm going to bring on my guest. I have with me Megan Almon with the Life Training Institute and Summit Ministries. Welcome to the program, sister.
Thank you, Jeff. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on. You have a lot of knowledge on these things. So before we get into everything, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, I live in Colorado, but I am a Georgia native. So I was born and bred in Georgia, moved out here about 4 years ago when my husband Tripp began working full-time with Summit Ministries. And we are so happy to be where we are. I come from a family of acrobats. My husband and I were both gymnasts. We both attended the University of Georgia, and we have 2 children, and they too are, all the flips, all the climbing, all of the handstands, all around the house all the time. So our lives are busy. With Life Training Institute, I love the benefit of getting to be with my children and be at home, but often I'm on the road and traveling and speaking to groups on the topic of pro-life apologetics. Which is not in any way, saying I'm sorry for the pro-life view or the larger Christian worldview in which it rests. But I'm giving reasons, and I'm helping people understand, how do we have these conversations well? So I talk to a lot of people who agree with me and a lot of people who disagree with me. And believe it or not, those conversations can go very well. So that's a little bit about me. And yeah.
So pro-life apologetics, I had never heard of that. Anytime I hear the word apologetic, I'm thinking of religion, Christianity. I'm thinking of, people who go out there and defend the faith. But I never heard of pro-life apologetics, but it's been needed. It's been needed for a long time, and it's going to continue to be needed. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But can you just walk us through how you even got involved in this space in the first place? Like, how did you get to where you are right now doing what you do?
Great question. My undergraduate degree was in journalism. So I actually worked as a journalist when I was first married. I worked for a small community newspaper and mainly wrote feature stories about people because I was trained in magazine writing. And so that newspaper let me get away with a lot as far as writing like a magazine writer. But however, we were small enough where I would occasionally be sent to cover community events. And one evening, sure enough, my editor came out of her office, handed me a camera and said, "You need to go cover this event. There's free food." And so I went. And the speaker that night was Scott Klusendorf. He was speaking at our local Pregnancy Resource Center's annual fundraising banquet. For those who are familiar and those who aren't, Pregnancy Resource Centers are largely run by volunteers around our nation, and many of them have one major fundraising event each year. And that's how they raise the majority of their money to use and help women and families for that year. And so I heard Scott speak, and he was speaking about the very things he has now trained me to speak about. But I wasn't familiar with the topic either. I just knew there was a man who's obviously a very godly man standing up on stage talking about an issue that is very difficult to talk about with a group of people, and doing it in such a way that I thought, I bet somebody could ask him just about anything, and he might not know the answer, but he's not going to be shaken by it. There was just a groundedness about him, and I thought, whatever that is, those are the stories I want to start telling. And so through a series of events, it took about a year and a half, I started reading all of the Christian apologetics material I could get my hands on. And pro-life apologetics is a segment of that. And I ended up going back to school with my husband's full support. He said, I think you could do something really special with this interest that you have. And so I earned a master's degree in apologetics from Biola University on Christian apologetics, and came full circle by joining Scott at Life Training Institute, because for me, it had always been about people. Humans fascinate me. Human dignity fascinates me. Why we matter, and the beauty of just being human within the limitations that we have. I love talking about those types of things and reading about them. And so not only did I know enough about abortion to know that I needed to do something to help bring an end to it. And so this is the route that I went. But also, when we talk about these issues, we talk about pro-life apologetics, we're digging up underneath it to get to the heart of what it even means to be human, what it means to be valuable as a human being. Those are the things that bring me back every time. And so Scott has trained me from the ground up at Life Training Institute. He would tell you that I bugged him until he hired me. That is not the way I would tell the story, but that works. I just wanted to learn from him, and I was persistent, and he finally gave in, I guess.
It's funny how God works that way. I mean, you go on this random assignment, you got your free food, you got your camera, you're just doing your thing, and then you see this guy who inspires you, and then it gets to where it's like when you look back, you can see what God was doing, and then he puts you where you are right now, working under him. That's an incredible story.
Oh yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and it's also interesting what you mentioned when you talk about the overall debate, because when we think about abortion, we're thinking, okay, we don't want to kill babies, and that alone is worthy of fighting for. But you're right, because it does bring up other issues, like what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a life? What does that mean in relation to what the word says? And that can open up a whole other world of conversation. I would imagine that it has for you on many an occasion. Like it goes a lot deeper than saving lives. It also gets to even the spiritual aspects. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely, it's fair to say. No, I don't know if I saw this going into studying pro-life apologetics in particular, but these conversations, because they touch on those things, lead to gospel conversations more than any of the other conversations that I have with students or otherwise, because those are our deepest questions. We long to know who we are. We long to know that we're seen, that we matter, that our life has purpose. And so we want the answers to those things. And the world is answering those questions for us. What does it mean to be human? Why are human beings valuable? In all different kinds of ways. And as we teach our students here at Summit, ideas have consequences. The answers that come from those questions result in ideas. Those ideas result in beliefs when they're adopted. And that has consequences for the way that we view ourselves and the way that we view others in the world around us. When I talk to students about the issue of abortion, I typically begin by helping them understand that at the very basic level, in a world that allows abortion, that's a world that assumes the idea that there are some human beings who simply matter more than other human beings. Interestingly enough, just to make the connection, that is the same undercurrent to every other major injustice that we see and that we rightly stand against. So I want them to see the link between those things. And then, of course, it's my job as the one giving the reasons to do the work of making a case for the pro-life view. And in turn, I hope that helps them have some tools so that when they are in conversations, they can do the same.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and that is the undercurrent. Like, it is the idea that some lives are matter more than others. And it's you, in order to perpetuate an evil like that, you have to view that person as less than human. If you're going to enslave somebody, you have to view them as less than human, unless you're a really sick person, because if you view them as a human equal to you, you can't do it. Same thing with war. I mean, a lot of times in war times, the armies are trained to see the enemy as subhuman, as monsters, because if you see them as actual humans, you're going to hesitate before you pull that trigger. So I guess here's my question: How does that figure into the conversations that you have as a pro-life apologist? How I'm trying to figure out how to ask this. Well, how does that influence the conversations that you're having with people who don't agree with you?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you about how we would make the case, and then maybe we can tease that out and how that might work out into a conversation. Because the first thing we have to learn to do in our conversations about abortion, because right now, abortion is the topic of the day. It has been for quite some time, but that is ramped up with the recent decisions by the Supreme Court. And so I think that people are talking about abortion, it seems, but at the same time, they're kind of talking about everything but abortion. The thing that makes abortion so complex is that there are many hard things that bump into the abortion issue. It is very complex emotionally and psychologically. That is obvious. It is complex politically, we've seen. It is complex economically, all of these things that bump into the issue. But morally speaking, abortion is a very simple issue. The whole debate hinges on a single question. And if we can learn to bring our conversations back to that question, then we can have real conversations about it where we're not missing each other. I think so often we try to make this kind of an us and them type of issue. But at the heart of it, like we've already pointed out, this is a human rights issue. This is an issue about identity and our humanity. So our real battle is one against, of course, sin. As Christians, we would say that. But also ideas. And that's what Paul pointed out in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Our weapons are not weapons of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of strongholds. I think he was talking about something like what we would call worldviews now there.
Yeah.
Because he goes on to talk about our job, our weapons are powerful to tear down arguments and opinions raised against the knowledge of God. We are to take thoughts captive to the obedience of Christ. So that's where the battlefield is. And so often we miss that. The question at the center of the whole debate has to be, what is the unborn? Like, what is this thing that we're even talking about? I give a simple illustration when I'm kind of playing this out for audiences. I just tell them to imagine a scenario like this. What if you were standing at your kitchen sink, you're washing dishes, which is, most of us have dishwashers now, but not everybody. You're up to your elbows, like in the dish suds. We can all remember a time when that was the case. Looking out the window, and your 4-year-old son comes into the room behind your back. You cannot see him. And he says, "Mommy or Daddy, can I kill this?" Which, I have a 10-year-old son, so this is not out of the question. This may or may not have actually happened in the course of my life. But your first question is going to be, like, you're going to freeze and you're going to go, "What are you holding? Like, what is it?" If my son is holding a spider, well, I'm going to help him kill it, like, swiftly and without remorse. Like, I don't do spiders in my house. If my son is holding our dog, like, okay, different question. We're going to put the dog away. Like, no, we're not going to kill the family dog. If my son is holding his sister, like, we have a problem, right? The answer.
Now you've got a whole other bucket of problems.
My husband served as a pastor for 10 years, so I don't even know where we'd go for help at that point, right?
Right.
No, the point is, the answer to what is it really does matter. So the whole abortion debate is hinging on, can we kill the unborn? Well, sure, if the unborn are not human beings. Like, if what we're talking about, as so many want to claim, is no different than clipping a fingernail or pulling a tooth, if it really is just a simple medical procedure, if that's what it is, then we can all retire. We can all just relax. But if the unborn are human, that's different. So we have to answer that question, what is the unborn, before we can fairly talk about whether or not we can, quote, kill the unborn. Most people skip that question. And so when I'm listening to other people in conversation, here's where we'll bring it full circle to the conversational piece. And I hear them give justifications for why abortion ought to be allowed, why it ought to be legal even. I'll hear things like an appeal to privacy is an often one. That was the legal justification under Roe as it stood before, an appeal to privacy. This is a private matter between a woman and her doctor. I'll hear an appeal to poverty, which is not an easy issue. Like, this woman can't afford to feed another child. Why would you force her to go through with a pregnancy? I will hear things like, this enables women to pursue their dreams, their careers, their educational goals, without an unplanned pregnancy standing in the way of that. Abortion prevents unwanted children from being born. who may not be loved the way that they ought to be loved. Abortion prevents disabled children from suffering once they are born. We don't want them to suffer. Abortion, if we were to make it illegal, I'm hearing this one a lot lately, we would only be banning safe abortions because women will seek illegal abortions in which they may be harmed or worse in back alleys or whatnot. And of course, anyone who is harmed because of an abortion is a travesty. Anyone.
Sure.
I hear things like, if we make abortion illegal, well, isn't that just Christians forcing their religious views on other people? Can we do that? So the list keeps going and going and going. These are all justifications. None of them deal with easy things or flippant things, but they all skip that question. So what I'm going to do anytime I hear a justification for abortion is I'm going to ask myself, what if we were talking about a 3-year-old? What if the subject were the 3-year-old? We know that 3-year-olds are human. We're going to think about a toddler. They're human, they're crazy, but they're human. And so when we do that, it makes things very clear all of a sudden. We don't kill 3-year-olds in the name of privacy. We don't kill them when they are expensive. We don't kill them when they stand in the way of something that we want, even our dreams. We don't kill 3-year-olds who are unwanted. We don't kill them when they're disabled. We have no problem with laws that make it harder to kill 3-year-olds just in case the person seeking to do so might be harmed in the act of trying. And it's no more religious to say that my toddler nephew has value and cannot be killed than to say that he doesn't have value.
Right.
So though these things are important, they skip that most important question, what is the unborn? Because they're already assuming that the unborn are not human. And what I'm going to do is probably in a conversation, use a toddler as an example and try to make the link back to the question. That doesn't make a case for the pro-life view, but it does frame the conversation in a way that's helpful so we can actually begin talking about it. So, one of us is assuming the unborn is not human like the toddler. One of us is assuming it is. Let's talk about that.
So, okay. So yeah, there's other questions I want to ask about the political and cultural aspects of it, but you kind of got me intrigued here. So, because when you were talking, I was thinking, okay, the dog and the spider, 3-year-old clump of cells. And that's how a lot of these people see it. And I know you've gotten that argument a billion times. So when you're talking about creating that line between the 3-year-old and the clump of cells, how do you create that line?
Well,
or that link, I should say.
Yeah, no, great question. The question, what is the unborn, the one that we should begin with, is not a religious question. That's important to point out. So no matter who we're talking about, and not only that, but in the pro-life spectrum, Christians or religious people per se are not the only ones who are pro-life. I follow an organization called Secular Pro-Life. They give excellent reasons for the pro-life view. I follow atheists who are pro-life, and I'm fascinated to hear what they have to say. So the pro-life case is grounded in science and in philosophy, not ultimately, I think we have to go deeper to worldview. I would ground it in theology. But I think when you're making a case with people, you can start with the things that were right in front of us. What is the unborn?
I think the pro-choice thing, when they bring up religion, I think it's a red herring. I think it's a way to deflect from the actual conversation by focusing on the religious aspect rather than the actual conversation. Like I don't really take it seriously because there are religious beliefs involved in this, especially for people like you and I. But this isn't about forcing one's religion on somebody else. It's like saying, oh, well, if you pass a law against murder, the Bible says not to murder. So you're putting your religion on me because now I want to murder. No, it's not the same thing. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. I think you're right. When people bring that up as an objection, you got to understand where they're coming from. It might be a red herring. And I think you're right. Most of the time it is kind of this deflection. Oh, well, you're dismissed because you're a religious person. I would not say that religious arguments are dismissed from the marketplace of ideas, because I think that, Christianity is true, and as do you in a real sense, and that we can talk about it reasonably. But what is the unborn is a scientific question. And so typically that's where I would go to address that question. And there is a branch of science called embryology, the study of embryos, that answers the question consistently the same way and has for quite some time. And in as much as we've discovered what the science has to say about it, just to break it down, embryology tells us that from the moment of conception, you and I, Jeff, were living, distinct, whole, human beings. That is what we were and what we are. We know that the embryo is alive, even at the single-celled stage. It does things that every organism does. This is stuff you learn in like 7th grade life science, right? It grows, it turns food into energy, it responds when you mess with it. Even been shown embryos are great at repairing wounds. So we know they're alive. The embryo is distinct, not part of the woman's body, like my arm would be a part of my body. The embryo is attached to its mother, but has its own unique genetic code that differs from its mother's and from its father's. And in that way, it is very distinct. And the science there keeps going. I mean, we could dig at that a little if you wanted to, but distinct from the mother. And the embryo is whole. That is, unlike my skin cells, I can scratch my hand and send hundreds of my skin cells to the desk in front. That's disgusting. But they're lying on the desk in front of me. Some of them are still alive right now. They will die in just a minute. They all contain my DNA encoding, but I am in no way guilty of murdering my cells. Those cells are part of me. They contribute to the overall function of the organism that is me. An embryo, even at that single-celled stage, is its parts contribute to its overall function as a distinct organism. And it goes on to do something remarkable. So one more distinction I'll make, and then we can, I can send you to resources because it is fascinating. We tend to think of embryos as things that are constructed, as a sum of their parts, if you will, which is why we have that language. Oh, it's just a clump of cells, or it's just a mass of tissue. And if you think about, I said ideas have consequences. Even the language that we use in our post-industrial revolution culture, we don't talk about procreation anymore. We talk about reproduction. So it's very factory terminology, but the embryo does something that no constructed thing, that's a sum of its parts that comes into being over time, that no constructed thing could ever do. And from the moment that we came into existence, we have driven our own development from within. We weren't constructed at all. We drove our development from within. We came into being all at once. And things like that, philosophers would call that a substance kind of thing versus just a properties kind of thing. That's just a sum of its properties or a sum of its parts. Substance kinds of things come into being all at once. They don't become more of their kind as time passes. Rather, they have something that grounds their identity through time and through change. They mature according to their kind. And that's exactly what we all did as embryos and what many of us are still doing. The teenagers that I speak to at Summit are still doing exactly that as I'm talking to them. So the science is quite fascinating, but it does answer the question.
Awesome. So you gave me some homework. Now I have to go and study embryology. Thanks.
No, you just that's enough to know, really. I mean, that gets at it. But sure, you can study it, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, but you got me curious. It sounds very fascinating because those are the arguments that you don't hear a lot about from the pro-life side. And not everybody, is going to dig into embryology. I get that, but that aspect of it is important because it does diffuse that whole, this is just a religious argument. Well, no, this is also scientific, and this is how it works out. And I think a lot of us know this on some level because we did take biology when when we were kids. So we kind of know this stuff, but not the way that you just laid it out. So that's very interesting. So I want to talk about the societal conversation that we're going to be having. So Roe v. Wade has been overturned. The decisions about abortions are back to the states now. How do you see this debate shaping up going forward?
Well, I think the first thing to note is anyone who was paying attention knew that this moment was always going to be difficult and even ugly in some ways. And it has proven to be that difficult and in some ways ugly. I think that moving forward, what's going to happen in terms of people who are pro-life and who are trying to have these conversations, a couple of things have changed. Our job hasn't changed. We're still making the case for the pro-life view to our friends and our neighbors and defending the unborn with well thought out arguments and ideas, not arguments in the bad sense of the word, but in the good sense of the word, arguments that honor other people, because we want what's true. And so we're going to be doing that. What's changed is that our voices now count for something in the political arena. I saw a post the other day on social media that was talking about the fact that people are so angry because they feel like a right has been taken from them. Those who are mad about the overturn of Roe versus Wade, that this right to abortion has been stolen. When in reality, what this court decided wasn't that we're going to take away a right. It was rather, we're going to look into the Constitution to see, was there a right there to begin with? And what the ruling actually indicated was there's not anything there that would indicate this right to abortion that they talked about in 1973 is something that has a firm foundation in our Constitution. There is no right to abortion that is found there. And so, this post was indicating the good news is that nothing has been stolen. It's just that we've been lied to for 50 years almost in terms of this. So I think moving forward, we have these battleground states. We have states where life will be more protected. We have states where it won't. And what we're going to see is exactly what we're seeing now. The movement to try and allow those who are more abortion minded to have their abortions, whether that means they're crossing state lines or battling for those rights within their states. And so right now, these conversations matter perhaps more than ever. My hope is that the law will be a teacher, as it always has been. Anytime we see law change at the federal or national level, within some time, our popular consensus tends to shift with it. For years now, the unborn have been discounted from the valuable human community. That has been the real debate in the whole abortion debate. It wasn't about who loves women and who hates them. That's an odd thing to me to even think about. Even just to think about. Yes, it is. And even to take it a step deeper, to say that we live in a nation that in order to love women well, they must have access to abortion. That's so odd to me. That tells me that we live in a nation that thinks that in order for women to truly be successful, we must treat part of our essential biology as a handicap. That's not a nation that loves women as women. That's different. It's a nation that loves something like, if I could be quite frank, sex without consequences, which is, part of the conversation here. So I think moving forward, our job is to keep on making excellent arguments, having the conversations. Our courage in talking about abortion enables people to talk about it more freely. It instills courage in others. And in many circumstances, it allows women who maybe have had past abortions to talk about them, sometimes for the first time, with someone that they feel is a safe person to talk to. And of course, all of it, I think, should be done through the lens of the gospel, which I believe is very true. And in that sense, I don't believe that we walk around condemning and inciting guilt. I think what we're doing is talking about the truth of the matter, that everyone counts among the valuable human community, even unborn human beings, in such a way that we're extending grace of the truth to others and the opportunity for healing for those who have been hurt by abortion, because that is one common denominator, no matter who I talk to, from the staunchest abortion advocate to the most passionate pro-life advocate. One thing that is common is that abortion causes an immense amount of pain. So I think we have to be ready for that too. There's a lot of healing that needs to take place.
I think so, and I think it's been a long time coming, and hopefully this can help to facilitate that. And I do want to talk a little bit more about that aspect too, but I also wanted to find out, what do you think, now that the Supreme Court decision has been handed down, what is the pro-abortion crowd going to do next? Now they don't have a Supreme Court decision to hide behind. Mm-hmm. What are they going to do to keep abortion in place as much as they can?
I think in some ways we already see them doing it. They're going to fight for it. And in the same way that pro-lifers have fought for decades now to advocate for the lives of the unborn, they're going to fight for this so-called right to abortion. And I think that what we have to understand is that the people who are doing that, I don't think that they're out there with the mindset of we want to kill babies. That would be a mischaracterization. I think that just like when we saw the film Unplanned, about Abby Johnson. One thing I liked about that film is the fact that when they portrayed her early on in her career with Planned Parenthood, she did what she did because she truly believed she was doing the right thing.
Right.
And so that I think that people who are fighting for abortion think that they are doing what is right in a way that will help women. And so that's where the conversation has to come in, is to try and convince them this is not the best way. This is not the most human response to what's happening in our nation. We can do better than abortion. We're going to see them do that politically. We've already seen it in the states that have that kind of set themselves up in preparation for what happened with the Supreme Court decision. States like New York and Oregon and Washington and California, Colorado, my state, with very liberal abortion laws. They're going to allow abortion. In Colorado, there's a late-term clinic up in Boulder. So abortion hasn't gone anywhere in much of our nation. I think that we're going to see them rally. The corporations who would stand behind more liberal policy are going to push for these types of things in ways that they do in other arenas. I've already seen, businesses and others who are making funds to help women seeking abortions, businesses and larger corporations that have offered to pay for travel so that employees can obtain abortions. I think this is what we're going to see a lot of. And unfortunately, we're going to continue to see the character attacks that have been coming out. And right now, the amount of false information out there is pretty startling in terms of what these pro-life states will or will not allow, particularly with women whose lives are at risk, or things like ectopic pregnancies or dangerous miscarriages, all of which are tragic situations. But there's not a pro-life law out there right now that would say that a woman who needs a life-saving procedure cannot have one. So a lot of stuff going on out there in the midst of the turmoil, in the midst of the fear of what might come, and in the midst of the anger.
So it sounds like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if I were to sum that up, I mean, it sounds like now, before when there was Roe v. Wade, there was the debate existed, but it wasn't as intense as it's going to be, because there's now the federal government isn't mandating abortion. Now it can go either way depending on which state you're in. So now it's going to be more of a debate in the public space, which is kind of a good thing, I think, because now we can really have these conversations. Because before it was like, well, it's already settled law, it's already there, it's not going anywhere. Well, now it has gone somewhere. So now both sides have to actually get in and engage in the conversation.
That's absolutely true. And I think, we can't overlook the work of pro-lifers in recent years who have been working on the ground tirelessly to try and make abortion unthinkable in the minds of people. That clearly has led to something like this in this moment, although abortion has never been a settled issue in the United States. You're right in saying that because it was at the federal level through Roe versus Wade and its sister law, and then later through Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992, something that was kind of had this cushion around it. It was safe, so to speak. But the moment that came under threat, we saw what happened, even when the leaked draft came out and things ramped up and escalated very quickly. So yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, definitely. So I really wanted, the main reason I wanted to have you on was to talk about what pro-lifers need to be doing now that it is overturned, now that, more mothers will be considering having their children, whether it's by necessity or because of their mind changing or what have you. What's always bothered me is that if somebody wants to terminate their pregnancy, you already know where to go. You don't even have to look it up. You go to Planned Parenthood, or you can just go on Google and find something else. It's easy. It's easy. And on the other side, that information is readily available. Like, there is no one organization like Planned Parenthood, but in reverse, that I know of, that does what pregnancy centers do. They're more local organizations. And when you look them up, you can find them. But I would imagine that, Planned Parenthood has a lot more name recognition than crisis pregnancy centers. So now that this has happened, what do we need to be doing to show mothers that there are other options, that there are alternatives to Planned Parenthood? Because it almost seemed like that was just a foregone conclusion. Oh, I have an unwanted pregnancy, go to Planned Parenthood. How do we get them to think, okay, I don't have a lot of money, not married, or maybe I am married but we're poor. Where do I go to get support if I'm struggling with the idea of aborting my child? Like how do we get that into the zeitgeist?
Great question. Let me begin just by fleshing out the rest of what I started a few minutes ago with the science, to talk a little bit about the philosophical side of it just for a second, and then to get to those practical things. I think part of it, like I said a minute ago, is that this debate has never been about who loves women, who hates women, who is for freedom and who isn't, that kind of thing. It's been about who counts among the valuable human community. Who are we going to allow in? Most people are informed on the science at the popular, well, I'd say that anyone who's talking to who's informed on the debate knows what the science says. There are many who don't, which is why we still hear that terminology, which is why it was important to address it. But for those who say, oh, we know they're human, but they don't have the rights that you and I have, that's where that idea, well, some human beings must matter more than others. That's where that comes in. And so this is a debate about value. There are only two avenues of thought in philosophy as to why we are valuable. One is that we might be functionally valuable. That would be a value that is attributed to us based on function, or it might be traits, attributes, abilities. And there are 1,000,001 answers like that. The other type of answer philosophy allows is that we might be intrinsically valuable. So simple, most people just overlook that one. It means you're valuable in light of the kind of thing you are. You matter because you're human and because you share this common human nature. So just very quickly, Stephen Schwartz is a philosopher who says that the intrinsic view is the only one that has any hope for human equality. Because anytime you name a functional thing as the thing that gives us value, those are the things that come to us in varying degrees. He names 4 categories that we can think of ways that we differ from embryos or ourselves as embryos. They're smaller, so size. They're less developed, level of development. They're located in a different place, that's their environment. And they have a different degree of dependency. So size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency. That is Stephen Schwartz's famous SLED acronym. But we'll just take one example. We'll look at size. Some would say the embryo is so tiny, it's insignificant. Well, they're answering the question, why are human beings valuable, by saying it's their size. That's what gives them value. The problem with that answer is that in doing that, they've created this value spectrum. And on that spectrum, smaller human beings matter less than larger human beings. We've created a society where some human beings don't matter as much as others. And that's going to happen with any functional difference that you name as the value-giving thing. Level of development could be consciousness, brain development, the ability to breathe, the viability, the ability to survive outside of the womb with medical assistance. All of those things are functional differences, but those come to us in varying degrees. And viability, as a matter of fact, is related directly to the technology that's available. So it could change just if you fly to a different country. All that to say, the only answer that makes sense is that we matter because we're human. So I bring that up because I think that the more we talk that way and walk that way, so to speak, that we treat others with the intrinsic dignity inherent to them, even when they disagree with us, that we recognize that there is no human being disqualified from ultimate value because of something that they can or can't do, or they do or don't look like, or whatever it happens to be. We can look at history and see how this has been disastrous on many occasions and still is. So it's important that we understand those things. All of that, by the way, attached to ultimately, I think, the Imago Dei. So Genesis, page 1, So if we can learn to bring those conversations back and start recognizing, like, oh, they're making that spectrum because they think that the reason human beings should deserve rights is A, B, or C. And we can point that out to people. That's a helpful thing. Now, in terms of what we do practically, I think that pointing out the fact that pregnancy centers exist, because you're right, these are not the stories that we hear about. It is shocking to know what they do, in the communities where they exist. And part of the reason we don't hear about them is because they don't have a lot of money backing them, and they use every cent that they do get to help women and families who find themselves in these situations. And contrary to popular belief, not just until a baby is born, but years into that child's life, that mom has resources for herself and her child, and a community that comes around her with the support that she needs, most often connected to a local church, which, if they're doing it right, also comes around and says, you're part of our family now. Groups like Embrace Grace, who actually help churches form communities for single moms who find themselves unexpectedly pregnant and afraid, adopt these moms into their churches. And they're doing fantastic work. But I wanted to read something I found actually on Live Action, which is Lila Rose's wonderful pro-life organization. Yep. About pregnancy centers, things that we don't often know about them. And you can kind of find this if you look on their website, but the fact that they serve nearly 2 million people annually with free services, more than $266 million of free services, pregnancy tests, ultrasounds, formula, bottles, diapers, like you name it. They offer parenting classes to hundreds of thousands of people each year. They perform more than 486,000 free ultrasounds, provide 750,000 free pregnancy tests, and just the amount of other things, outfits for mom and baby, like in the shops that they make. There are more than 2,700 pregnancy resource centers in America. So that outnumbers abortion providers in general 3 to 1. It outnumbers Planned Parenthoods 5 to 1, and that number is now growing because of the states where abortion providers are having to shut down their businesses.
Yeah.
So contrary to popular belief, pregnancy centers, which most of the ones in existence are staffed by medical professionals, many of whom volunteer their time, they are doing fantastic work in the community. They are people giving of their time, money, resources, things to say, we see you moms, we see you families, and we want to help you. Please come. We have what you need. So you're right. That's not a narrative that we hear very often. So I'd say number one, what we can do, support your local pregnancy center, whether it's through a monetary giving, because they will use it well, or through donating things like diapers, bottles, formula, outfits, strollers, toys, books, like all of these different things that a young mom and dad might find themselves in need of. You can donate through that, but you can also donate in other ways. The young people that I talk to, they might be too young to serve as a counselor in a pregnancy center, though they have the heart and want to. So I tell them, well, what are you good at? A lot of them are so tech savvy. And so I tell them, these pregnancy resource centers, nobody knows they're there. What if you ran a social media page for them, or built a website for them? A lot of them are older volunteers at this point, and they are doing hard work day in and day out and loving women well, but they don't know how to do that.
Sure.
So there are so many ways to step in and help just with the things you're able to do already. And it's not hard to step up and do that. Of course, I think that we need to make our case and be equipped to do so. So we need to educate ourselves. And our organization has a plethora of free resources online. We will send our speakers out to work with groups and teach people how to have these good conversations, respectful conversations, in a way that is winsome, and in a way that is open to listening, because we want what's true. We stand on the pro-life case because we think it's actually true, and we have good reasons for that. But that's a humble position. It's not one that thinks, oh, we're better than or anything like that. It's a position that says, oh, I'm open to hearing. I'm open to good argumentation in the old-fashioned sense that respects you as a person and is open to hearing your ideas, and let's talk about them for real. So we do that. But I think that we're limited by time and resources. That's our only limitations, and maybe creativity.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because a lot of what you said, I didn't even know. And I'm familiar with pregnancy centers. I know what they are. I kind of have an idea what they provide. But a lot of what you said that, I didn't even know. So, to the average layperson, they wouldn't know either. And it's important. I think we do need to get more exposure for them. Because like I said, they don't have the same name recognition as Planned Parenthood. But Planned Parenthood has a whole political party behind them. They've got an activist media behind them. I mean, they've got everything going for them, and we need to have that to counter that as well.
Right.
I forgot what I was going to ask.
Okay. Well, let me say this. No, you go ahead, and then I'll say it.
Okay. So I mean, the way I see it, and maybe you'll agree, or maybe you'll have something to add. The question I was going to ask was, you know, we've been pushing for the end of Roe v. Wade. Now that it's gone, what should we be pushing for? Honestly, I think this is it. I do, because people on the pro-choice side always say, "Oh, you only care about birth. You're pro-birth, but you don't care about the baby after it's born." Yada 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 yada. That's not true, because we just discussed this. There are organizations out there helping, but in some cases, I think that criticism can be valid, because a lot of times we don't think about this. And now that Roe v. Wade is gone, I'm afraid that the momentum might go down, because we think it's dealt with. But I think that our next push should be to get these organizations more help, to create more of them, and to really set them up as a viable, that in a way that they're perceived as a viable alternative to terminating a pregnancy.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think? Or do you think maybe we should be focused on something else?
I absolutely think that is true, because they're already doing the work, and they have been all along. We just didn't hear about them as much, but the people who have benefited will tell you different stories. I think that there's more to it than just that. When I'm talking to the rising generation of young leaders, you know, they have boundless energy, and they are so smart. I have just such great hope for what's coming, contrary to what we hear sometimes. Like that's not my experience in talking to young people. They want to change the world and make a difference. They've got to realize that sometimes that's starting right where they are, because it's our acts of everyday faithfulness, one-on-one, in the relationships we have around us, biblically, that makes a big difference. Those conversations, those simple acts of obedience or service do have eternal ramifications. But when I'm talking to them, one thing I do want them to think about is not just, let's give these organizations what they need. Christians have been doing that, like I said, for a long time, and in amounts of time, money, resources, and things that outnumbers any other group demographically, as far as giving to help those who are struggling, and in the private sector, at least. I think that one thing I want to do is cast a vision for them and for those listening. We live in a world that's fighting over abortion, but in such a way that kind of accepts our society the way that it is right now. So we're looking at these parameters going, well, this is the way society is, so this is the way abortion needs to work in it or not work in it. And my thing is, and I've read people who said this even better than I could, but I agree with them. I think that there's something about changing our culture instead of expecting that we need to change our bodies to fit the culture. This is kind of tacked onto what I said earlier, that it's strange that we live in an abortion-minded culture that says to love women well, we need this thing. What if we lived in a culture that loved women as women and children better than it does? So what would it look like if our university campuses and our workplaces began to change in such a way that women as women and children were more welcomed there? That being pregnant was not something that you felt like, oh, how am I going to explain this to my boss and work this out and all of that? Like I think many times those conversations do go well, but there's a lot more we can do in terms of that going better. What would it look like, for example, I've seen a couple just recent examples off the top of my head. One was a photograph in a library of a woman working at a desk. And next to the desk, there was a little like knee-high wooden, almost play area, maybe 4 by 4 feet. It had toys in it that were like attached to the walls that you could play with, and they were easy to clean, obviously. But this was a desk for a working mother in a public library. She was working at the computer and her toddler was playing happily beside her. What would it look like I saw a YouTube video recently of a mom in a university classroom with a professor lecturing. Mom was trying to take notes, and her baby that was with her, kind of strapped to her, newborn, started crying because the baby was hungry. So here she is, like looking all around. She's flustered because she's, oh, this is a disruption. She's trying to get the bottle ready. That professor, to his great credit, walked over, plucked up that baby, plucked up that bottle, and started feeding the baby and never stopped teaching. Just started walking around and teaching the same lecture. I cannot imagine what that did to the heart of that mom and to the hearts of the community that was there watching, going, hey, we see you, Mom. You're welcome here, and so is your baby, because they're part of the community. Like, children are noisy and hard because they have to learn to be adults, but it takes the community to teach them that. So I just start thinking, man, what would it look like if we start changing in a way that we're more open to something like that, and we didn't look just like we looked, post-industrial revolution? That would be interesting. So I think the more we push toward making abortion unthinkable, I hope that we push toward making it unnecessary in the minds of people. I think that it is wrong, but people have to be convinced, like, you're going to have what you need because you live in a nation that values all human beings, and in a nation that values you and your child in such a way that we're gonna walk that walk too. That's my great hope. And so I think we move towards that step by step.
That was deep, and we could go on for hours about that because now I have other stuff I want to ask. But I think that's a good place to leave it, honestly. Would you be willing to come back on sometime? Because I think there's so much more that I want to talk to you about.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Awesome. Well, before we sign off, that was like the best note to sign off on. Honestly, I think that's great. Casting that vision. What you said is stuff that I've kind of thought, but the way you said it is better than I could have even articulated it. So thank you for that.
Well, it's a hard sell. It's not an easy thing. So none of us can be naive enough to go, oh yeah, just like, no, we got to work for that. But I think we can, because I'm a Chestertonian irrational optimist. Like, there's hope.
There really is, and I think that we have to remember that, especially in these times. But before we sign off, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you?
Oh, sure, thank you. Well, as we said, Megan Almon, Life Training Institute's website is just prolifetraining.com. No dashes or anything, just prolifetraining.com. And you'll find resources there about our speaking team and what we can do. Other than that, like, I'm around, and here and there, wherever we're invited, we will go gladly and give a respectful and winsome presentation on the pro-life view. So we're happy to do that.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for coming on, and I'm looking forward to next time.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff.